working our way quite a bit slower than I intended through the Sermon on the Mount, but I have really been enjoying our interaction, the discussion. So looking forward to today's discussion as well. So we're in this section here beginning in chapter 7. That's it. Road, stop that. No, we're... You can't ignore that, can you? Oh, I'm sorry. We'll do Matthew 6 if you want to. I'm sorry. No, so last week's discussion, we were going through the end of chapter 6, and I know there's more to be said about that. The section there, verse 25 through 34, it's just so powerful. I'm just going to kind of hit some of the main points there before we move forward. But he tells us several times in that text, do not be anxious. Do not be anxious. And we talked about that. Other versions, I think, are translated, do not worry. Do not worry, do not be anxious. Anxious, to me, feels a little stronger, but worry makes you realize, the word worry makes you realize that, this is something, worry and anxiety, this is something that we all deal with every day. I mean, he's asking us not to do something that we all deal with every single day. Isn't that crazy? He's asking me to get a handle on this. And we had some good discussion last week, I thought. And, to me, I think about it a little like when you're going through James 1, and he tells us that, well, even back in chapter 5, let's just think about in chapter 5 of Matthew, where he tells us not to lust after a woman. He says, if you lust after a woman, you've committed adultery in your heart. And every man knows how hard that is. Every man knows it's so hard to keep those thoughts from taking root in your mind. And so it feels like an impossibility. The reality is that the feeling, the thought is going to be there regardless. But the question is, what are you going to do with the thought? Are you going to give the thought a place? Are you going to dwell on the thought? Are you going to allow the thought to marinate? And that's where, to me, it connects with James 1, where he tells us in James 1 that every man sins because of his own lust. And he describes the process there that when your lust has conceived, it brings forth sin. And that's been very helpful for me to think about, is the lust itself is not the sin. It's when you allow the lust to conceive in your mind, when you allow it to take root in your mind. So if you plug that concept in with this idea of anxiety, I think it helps. It helps to understand that just the mere fact that you had a worry is not a sin. Just the mere fact that you had an anxious thought is not a sin. The question is, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to dwell on it? Are you going to allow the worry to take over? Are you going to allow the worry to paralyze you? Or are you going to, in faith, trust that God will help you to deal with it? And that doesn't mean that the worry just goes away. See, this is where we feel guilty. The same way that a man can feel guilty every time he has a lustful thought, and you feel guilty, well, obviously you don't want to give place to that, and you need to deal with it. But if we feel guilty every time we have a worry, we'd be feeling guilty every second, wouldn't we? Like every day we'd be feeling guilty. Don't do that. Don't. What he's asking you to do is to not dwell on it. And what he's asking you to do is trust God enough. Several thoughts last week connected that, but he tells us to consider the lilies, consider the grass of the field. We're of more value than these. God takes care of these. Verse 32, the Gentiles seek after these worldly things, but our Father knows we need them. So verse 33, seek first the kingdom, seek his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. He will take care of our needs. And I probably should have started reading earlier, but where is it? Verse 30. Will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? So he connects it to our faith. And that's what we need to be able to do, is the worry, the anxiety, that's just a natural part of life. How are you going to deal with that? if you connect, if you allow yourself to have faith in God and you try to grow that faith in God, then the anxiety and the worry, you should be able to let go of some of that. You should be able to, yes, you're going to feel it, you're going to have it, but you're going to trust God to help you take care of it. And it's easier said than done. It's obviously easier said than done, but that's what we're working toward. That's the transformation process. So then part of the discussion last week, which I think we could spend more time on if we wanted to, but is, how much does God expect us to let go of anxiety? How much does he demand when he commands us, do not be anxious? How much anxiety must we get rid of? And I think part of that is understanding that God knows what we're capable of. God knows what we're capable of. And I think each one of us, you realize that certain people have a greater challenge with anxiety, just the same way certain men have a greater challenge with lust. That's just the reality. That's not excusing it. It's not saying it's okay, but it's a harder battle for some people. And so who can judge? Who can judge? Well, you're worrying too much. Shame on you. I'm judging that you're worrying too much. I don't get to do that. God is the one. And as with all of this chapter, with all of this, or this sermon, all of this sermon, we've been making the point, when he tells me not to do my good deeds to be seen of men, who is he asking me to judge? Myself. When he tells me to be light, be a light, to be salt, to be poor in spirit, to be meek, all of these things that we've been building on up to this point, that same point remains. He's not asking me to judge my fellow man. He's asking me to judge myself. Now, I think as brethren, we ought to be able to have these conversations about, when we see somebody and we're worried that maybe we're worried, we're anxious. We're worried that they're worrying too much. I'm worried, you're worried too much. And we see a potential problem in somebody's life. It is okay to go to them in love and have that conversation. And sometimes when we go to somebody in love and we have that conversation as, I'm worried about you because of this or that, or sometimes we get accused of being judgmental. But if we're going in love and just talking about a concern, that's not necessarily judgmental. That's just me trying to show concern for my brother. But the reality is that ultimately how much anxiety I have, how much I'm doing whatever in my life is between me and God, and we need to understand that. Yes, sir.
I can kind of rip off what you just a little bit. So that same word is used in a positive sense. In other places, concern or care is from that same thing. And in 1 Corinthians 12:25, when it talks about the body being put together, it says that there may be no division in the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. They have the same anxiety for one another or concern. To me, everything that you just explained and we discussed last week, it's like, okay, if we talk about the improper view of that, do I have that proper concern for my brother? Am I just mildly disinterested, or I'm concerned but not, I give it a thought. That depth of letting my mind dwell on my brother, and Paul uses the same thing later when he talks about Timothy having the same concern for their well-being in Philippi. It's that same term. So he's like, don't waste it on what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, and all those kind of things. God's going to take care of that. But it is proper to have that kind of concern for one another, to give it more thought than just
as with everything else in life. There's that balance. If you say, well, we shouldn't have any worry and just go through life not caring about anything, well, that's just silly. There's obviously responsibilities that we have. Great point. Appreciate that. So let's introduce the thought as chapter 7 begins. And I will say on verse 34, we had some good discussion last week. Do not be anxious for tomorrow. That's the fourth time I think he says, do not be anxious. For tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Tomorrow's going to have enough trouble of its own. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble, which is such a great anchor point, for us to realize is that life is going to have anxiety. Life is going to present problems. And if you're not feeling any concern, healthy concern, then you're not really trying, But each day is enough for itself. And that shows us that balance, is that when we're overly worried about the future, overly worried about things we can't control, that's where it becomes unhealthy. And again, that's up to us to judge ourselves and not others. And I think that's exactly why chapter 7 begins the way it does, because we've been talking about all of these different things that God cares about. God cares about how anxious I am and how anxious you are. God cares about how much I allow lust to dwell within my mind. God cares about me being humble and poor in spirit and hungering and thirsting for righteousness. He cares about all of that. And yet, knowing that he cares, we have a tendency to look at others and say, you should be hungering and thirsting for righteousness more. Why aren't you doing that? Why? And we'll judge their actions as being, well, you're only doing that because you want to be seen of men. Shame on us. And that's where I think he picks up here and says, judge not that you be not judged. Driving that point home that all of these things ultimately, our only responsibility for these things is how are they applying in my life? How am I living these things? And he tells us here in verse 2, with the judgment that you pronounced, it will be judged. With the measure that you measure, it will be measured to you. So to whatever standard I'm trying to hold somebody else to, God says, I'm going to hold you to that standard. So you better be careful. You better be really careful, because I think we all know it's so much easier to see the flaws in other people than it is to see the flaws in ourselves. It's so much easier to look at other people's actions and to impugn their motives and pronounce condemnation on them. And that's what God is asking us not to do. Don't be that way. Don't act like that. So I think this then touches on what I was alluding to earlier. So knowing this, that judge not lest we be judged, does that mean that I should never go and talk to my brother or my sister about a concern I have? Like if I'm concerned about the way you're living in some way or something I'm seeing in your life, must I never broach the subject? Must I not talk about that, lest you say, well, you're not supposed to judge me? I think we understand that as brethren, as Rhodes said, there's an obligation that we have. There's other verses we can point to where we're supposed to encourage one another. We're supposed to challenge and stimulate one another, and even correct and even rebuke one another. We can go to all those verses. So understanding that in light of this it takes a lot of wisdom. It takes a lot of wisdom to understand the difference.
You mentioned, about balance, and I think part of it too is just figuring out a way to know that you're going to have this situation with anxiety, and some people, as you said, are going to deal with it a lot more than others. But figure out a way to cope with it and then still serve God as He expects us to. Not let it paralyze us to the point that we can't do for others or serve in the way that He wants us. And that's, to me, just kind of gets down to the heart of it, is knowing you have this, but how do I cope with it and then still serve God and focus on Him and caring for others?
Yeah, exactly. In your comment there, I'm touching on, not only is it easier to see like the flaws in others, but it's easier for us to be harsher with others. It's easier for us to well, why can't you get on top of that? I don't have that problem because we feel like we've got a handle on that problem. Then it's easy to look down on others that don't have a handle on that problem. And that's what he's asking us not to do. We all have our own problems. We all have our own challenges. And to be patient, to be understanding, is all part of being brethren. Understanding this next verse, verse 3, I think, verse 3 and following, is really important. And it's a powerful image. And, I guess I'll say this. Sometimes I've heard people, make the point. So the point there in verse 3 is, if, you're noticing this speck in your brother's eye, you see this little problem in their life, but you don't notice this log that's in your own eye. You're somehow oblivious to the fact that you have this huge problem in your eye, in your life. And he says, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you can see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. And I think sometimes we skip forward to that end point, and the end point being that once I do take the log out of my eye, once I have dealt with my own problems, then he does tell us to try to help with the speck in our brethren's eye. And that's a fair point. Once we have dealt with our own problems, then we have an obligation. It's kind of like we were talking about, maturing to the point that we can be teachers. We were talking about that last week. Once we have matured to the point where we can be teachers, that should be a goal, because God wants us all to be teachers. He wants us to be teaching. So we ought to have that as a goal, to grow and mature to that point where we can start teaching. But let's not skip over the main point. We're going to that point, which is an important point. But the main point is, deal with your problems first. Get a handle on your problems first. It's so easy to be blinded toward our problems because we're so eager to point out problems in other people's lives. It's so easy to want to point the finger and nitpick others and just ignore the problem in our own life. And that's really what Jesus is trying to get at. You have your hand up, Jimmy?
Everybody knows here who listens to a hypocrite anyway. If someone's coming to you and they're a hypocrite, how much stock are you going to put into what they say?
Yes.
When it's so obvious to everybody else that long. So it's all this balancing act that we're talking about, this being spiritually balanced. You can have some worries, but not over worries, be anxious, things like that. That's the same thing here. He's not saying that you can't help someone and you can't judge them. Make sure you're good first, because it's a lot harder. I want to say it's a lot harder to hear a talking to. I just know from my own example.
Oh, I think honestly, if you talk to people who have turned away from the church, or people that never gave the church a chance, never gave Jesus a chance, a lot of times their main reason that they'll point to is, well, those people are hypocrites. I've noticed that they're not perfect Christians, and so therefore I can't be a part of that church. Like, well, you expect them to be perfect, and if they're not perfect, then you're not going to come be a part. It's like, none of us are perfect. None of us are perfect. We're all imperfect. Yes, sir.
And just to add a third leg to that, we also have to be on guard that we don't correct. Once we have corrected ourselves, we've got to be able to move forward with that.
Sure.
And be willing to reach out and help somebody to see this struggle. Because sometimes we can be hard on ourselves and be like, who am I to say ignorant?
Right.
And that's another constant struggle with that.
Yeah. You can take it too far. If you're waiting for yourself to be perfect before you open your mouth, you'll never open your mouth. So there is definitely a balance here that has to be understood. So yeah, great point, Angie. Absolutely. Several really good things worth meditating on in that. I appreciated Chandler's point about, who wants to listen to a hypocrite. I think we all have felt that at times, knowing that, that they have problems in their own life makes it where we feel like we shouldn't have to listen to them, or who are they to talk to us. But nevertheless, when you get to verse 5, there is encouragement to still try to help the other brother, to still try to help your brethren. And, that, again, that should be our goal. We talk our goal of maturing to the point where we can be teachers. In this context, the goal should be, working through our own problems enough to where we can help other people. That should be a goal. That should be something that we desire, to get on top of our own problems enough to be able to help somebody else. It's such a rewarding thing. Yes, ma'am.
Say on that there's not a thing that you can help another person with more compassion and understanding. That's something that you've been through and you overcame. You're gonna be able to say words of encouragement in a way that person needs to hear.
Amen.
And that's one of the best ways.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like that touches on the point that we had brought up over dinner the other night with that's, when people question why would God put me through such a dark, hard time, and it's so you know the way out when he sends you back in for someone else.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great point, Ian. Absolutely. Like we talked about a second ago, we all have our own challenges. Certain things in our lives are harder for us than things in other people's lives. We all understand that. So when we do get a handle on ourselves, when we are able to take that beam out of our eye, then we have a special skill set to be able to help people who had that same kind of problem in their life. And being able to see it that way is so powerful. To be able to see your own weaknesses and challenges, and even dark, like Ian's talking about, even dark times of your life end up being amazing tools for you to reach other people if you have that right mindset. Absolutely. And that really ought to be our goal. It really, the desire to help somebody ought to be our goal. His point is just make sure you're dealing with your own problems first, and also make sure you don't go to them with a judgmental attitude. Don't go to them with an attitude of condemnation. Go to them with an attitude of helping. I mean, that's what we're trying to do.
Just one other thing, with regards to, there's also, at least when I read it, it seems to be that there's a warning that if you judge people too harshly, God will judge you that same way. So it's have to be very careful with that type of harshness that you have, because it can affect you just as much.
For sure. That connects with some other principles that we can piece together in Scripture. Paul tells us that if we do something in our lives that's not from faith, it is sin for us. And that's a very interesting principle. Like if I do something, he said, doubt in my heart, like I'm not sure if this is right or not, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's like, for me, that is sin. For me, that is sin. And that's a principle. So here, to realize what God is saying, Jesus is saying, is if you're holding somebody to this standard, Jesus is saying, I will hold you to that standard. And that ought to petrify us. That ought to scare us, because it's so much easier to be harsh with someone else, but we don't want God to be harsh with us. And
something I've been thinking about, it's when you think about David, what he did to Bathsheba. And then he has that guilt presented towards him. And there is an interesting, I guess, moment where Amnon does something similar. And you have David struggle to, one, correct, also kept quiet for too long. And this is just speculation, but I wonder if the reluctance for David to actually forgive himself for what he did caused an imbalance in actually judging correctly and what needed to be done, even though he himself was forgiven of something atrocious, to help his son to go on the right path. And in the end, he ended up being killed by his own brother because justice wasn't delivered in the way that it should have been. So it's just an interesting thing to be wary of letting regret withhold yourself from doing the right thing.
Beware letting regret, remorse keep you from saying or doing the right thing. It really connects back with Minji's point, I think, is that we can keep from saying something because we know we're imperfect. Like, who am I to correct that? I have that problem in my own life. Well, maybe that means you're perfect. Maybe that means you're the perfect person to help them. Not that you are perfect, but that you are a tool. To Ian's point, you can be God's tool to help that person because you've already been through that. That's really great. So there's a responsibility. Like on the opposite side of all of this, we could sit there and say, well, my problems are too great. I don't have a handle on my stuff. I'm just not going to say anything. And you, not only are you withdrawing from helping others, but sometimes you stop working on your own problems too. You just completely shut down. We used the word paralyzed earlier. It gets back to a point we kind of consistently make is God is calling us to a standard of perfection. He's calling us to be holy as He is holy, and we all know we're never going to get there. We're never going to be holy as He is holy, never going to be perfect as He is perfect, and so we just stop trying. And that's when the devil is born. When we stop trying, that's when he wins. We've got to keep pushing through all these things and working on our own problems and trying to help others with theirs. But you can help, I guess part of the point, you can help somebody without being judgmental. You can help somebody without being condemning. It's not our job to condemn. It's not our job to condemn. It's our job to help people to see what God is saying and let the Word speak to them. Let God's Word speak to them. I don't get to judge them. That's important. Yes, ma'am.
Just say something on top of that is we are called to judge the action, to know what is wrong and what is right,
Yes.
but not the person.
Yeah.
The
Not the
person
motive, it's not the heart. Yep.
is not really their actions in that moment.
That's right.
And if we focus on that and if we focus on saving the person and letting them see their actions, we're not going to be judgmental of the person. And they can feel that love.
Yeah, absolutely. So to that point, let's process verse 6. Let's plug verse 6 into all of this. Do not give dogs what is holy. Do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot, and turn and attack you. So what is that principle? Like, I'm not supposed to judge, but I'm also not supposed to throw my pearls before swine. I guess let's just define what is he talking? I mean, that's an image, it's a metaphor. What are we being warned against here? Throwing pearls before swine. What's the metaphor? Yes, yeah. So you're throwing God's wisdom at people who have no concern for being saved. They've stopped caring. Their heart is hard. They're not listening, and you just keep quoting scripture to them. You just keep thumping them with the Bible. Like, they're not listening. You're throwing scripture at them, and they're not listening. He's telling us, stop. Don't waste your time. That's exactly right. Yes, sir.
Found it interesting that verses 1 through 5 says, hypocrite, get yourself right first, and then seek. And then he says, don't throw it to unholy. Mine says, don't waste what is holy on people who are unholy, because of God. But I always found it interesting because sometimes you can clear your own claim, and then you start seeing clearly, and it's like, well, that person doesn't even want to change. So why should I waste my time? There are tons of people out there who are lost that are seeking. Let me make sure I'm looking for them. So I always found it interesting. It was right after verses 1 through 5, after the hypocrite, clearing your own eyes.
Well, so much of the gospel message is it shows us both extremes, and he's asking us to use wisdom to find the right path in the middle. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think the idea that I always see in this is what Jesus is really pointing to is you got to take care of yourself. And when you think about Judgment Day coming and we're all before it, we're not going to be standing there to be able to help anybody at that point. And you're going to be judged on what you've done. And this idea of throwing pearls before swine, I always think about you get yourself pretty well right for whatever period when you're trying to help somebody and they're just not responding and you're like, look, I can see it, I know what you're doing, I did it, this, that, and the other. And if you don't let that go after a while, it's got the potential to drag you back down in it. So you've got to know when there's a point to back off.
Yes.
And it's not easy, but that's the concept that I get from that.
Absolutely.
All that leading up to it is about taking care of you,
That's
taking care of yourself.
That's
This principle is so good.
Absolutely. You give what is holy to dogs, pearls to swine, and eventually it'll have an effect on you. That's a great point. Steve?
Yeah, I was thinking about, we can kind of go too far with that,
For sure.
because like Brother Jeff, going down to the jailhouse to teach others, how many people could easily say they're not worth talking to, but he's taking a stand. It's different than most of us. We can look and say, well, how much are we doing to
Absolutely.
help people
Yeah,
that you would think don't need help?
absolutely.
I do think there's also a point where it kind of ties in to like the bad company corrupting good morals. There's only so much sometimes that we can do before it can start to harm us. It can discourage us even. Just, I'm working so hard at this. Why is this person not understanding? And why, or especially somebody who knows all of it and has fallen away. And it's like, why she knows or he knows and I don't get it. That can be really discouraging, and at that point it can turn into like, well, why is God letting this happen? And I think sometimes just removing yourself from that responsibility or taking yourself out of that situation can help you go, it's out of my hands.
Absolutely. I think when Jesus sent the apostles out on the limited commission, that you go into town, if they receive you, wonderful. If they don't receive you, shake the dust off your feet and go to the next place. Go to who's listening. So, and several comments. I just try to connect for a second. I think everybody's seen it very powerfully. Who gets to determine who the dogs are and who the pigs are? This is a really fun kind of exercise. He's telling us, don't throw our pearls, God's wisdom, righteousness. Don't throw our holy things to unholy people that aren't listening, people that have their hearts closed. So who determines that? In order for me to live this verse, I have to be able to determine who a dog is and who a pig is. I got to be able to determine who's not listening. So that requires me to be able to process. But therein is the danger too, because to Steve's point, we can judge with unrighteous judgment. We can judge, the Bible warns against judging with unrighteous judgment, judging according to appearance. I've judged somebody's, they're dressed immodestly, they got, all kind of, things that kind of stamp them according to the world. Somebody in prison, haven't even talked to him, but I'm just going to assume he's a dog, he's a pig, he's not going to listen because of X, Y, Z, because I can look and I can see he's not going to be interested. And so I prejudge based on appearance that he won't listen. And that's what Jesus is warning us against. Don't judge that way. Don't judge according to appearance. So again, who determines who the dogs are? Who determines who the pigs are?
They actually determine themselves, and I think that's kind of to the point, like what you mentioned with Jesus' exhortation to the disciples, is you give them a chance.
Yeah.
And there's certain people that you can have an exchange, and pretty soon you understand that they are just constantly trying to argue it, or if they're truly wrestling with it, you can help them, wrestle with it and learn something. Also with the process, it's, I think we've all been in discussions or even seen them online, but you just realize, okay, this person is not in.
This is not getting anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Chandler.
Just to roll on what you said earlier, I will pray the last several years my whole life is for discernment.
Yes.
Because that's what we're asking for here. When is a good time, when is not a good time? And it's tough to see some of the things. Again, obviously, some of them can't just show you right in your face that, hey.
I'm not interested. Some people will say, I'm not interested.
But the wisdom of discernment is what you're talking about, because you're right, sometimes you gotta go to the depths of some type of pain. And it's also maybe it's good for one person, and maybe not for the other, because y'all have different paths, so.
To Rhodes' point, keep coming back to that. Let them determine. Let them judge whether they're a dog or a pig. You put it out there, and what they do with it will determine that. Let them determine that.
And the scripture's so rich with examples of Christ and the apostles and how they would be in all kinds of different settings, teaching, preaching. Some were receptive, some didn't believe, some believed but still rejected him and them. And their response was not to chase them down and try to force it down their throat. It was sometimes even they would have to leave.
That's right.
So they, there was all kinds of different responses, and it's not a personal rejection of you necessarily,
Not at all, no.
but, even Christ had people reject him the same, and so it's their part, their response to the word, but it is for us to offer it and present it, and that's what we've been commanded to do.
Absolutely.
Their response, that's on them.
I know that this might sound weird, but in this arena, we're trying to say, who is worth my time? Who is worth my time? I've got the gospel. I want to save souls. Who is worth my time? And what we end up doing is we end up judging with unrighteous judgment based on appearances. That guy's not worth my time, not worth my time, I'll try him. That's terrible. That's not what we're supposed to do. Let them determine that based on, basically the image of the sower going out to sow. Think about that parable. The sower goes out to sow. He's just chunking seed. He's just chunking seed. Let it grow where it will. Let it grow where it will. And I guess my thought off of that, and then we'll get to Caleb's comment. Let's try to treat people the way God treats people. God offers the gospel to everyone. He offers the chance, to your point, he offers the chance to accept or reject to every single person. So give them the chance. Give them the chance to accept it or reject it. Give them the chance by offering it to them. Caleb and then Ian.
I was going to bring up the parable of the sower.
Were you? Oh, no, sorry. We'll just attribute that point to Caleb. Go ahead.
But that, to me, that sort of ties in with how many times did Jesus have the chance to give up on the Jews?
Yes.
And each time, it was like he never looked at them as the dogs or the pigs. He just kept going about, and it just so happened to be that he was able to walk away as many times as he was without being arrested or persecuted.
And I thought about that. That is true to a point, but then you get to a chapter like Matthew 23. Matthew 23, where he calls them brood of vipers, whitewashed tombs, hypocrites. He calls them hypocrites because at that point, they had proven themselves to be dogs. They had proven themselves to be pigs. They didn't want to hear what he was offering. And so he told it like it was. What Rhodes was that?
And remember this, some people are going to be, like some of the disciples who followed Jesus pretty quickly. Some are going to be like a Nicodemus. That, they have that conflict. It doesn't really seem like there's anything resolved in John 3. But later on we see, Nicodemus taking part in preparing the body of Jesus. That there are seasons in people's life as well. And I think part of it is if it's going to get to a point where you're realizing at this point they're a dog, at this point they're this, that you leave it in a way that's open so that when perhaps a change in the season of their life comes, that they would reach out to you and know that you're not an obstinate person who just, has closed the door forever.
Absolutely. That is such an important point, is leave the door open for them to change their heart. Leave the door open for them to change. But then also don't keep beating them over the head with the truth. It's okay to walk away. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Something I always heard about what my grandfather would do when he would study with someone and he could tell that they were struggling with the circumstance. He would ask them, and they would ask him, can I continue with, just for example, homosexuality and be considered saved or a Christian? he said, he would ask them, well, if you did have to give it up, would you? And based on their answer, he would say, well, just come back to me when you're willing to give that up, or we don't really need to go any further, because until you're willing to give that up, no, not that nothing else matters, but there's so much more that you're gonna have to do.
Yeah, it's the matter of counting the cost and realizing that you have to be willing to sacrifice everything. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say that, I think the ultimate message here is we have to be careful here with, first, being courageous. And then second, having enough wisdom and discernment to be able to walk away, when it's appropriate. And there's a balance that has to be done here. And the goal ultimately for our walk here on earth is to save souls. And it is, she touched on my point a little bit on the end of, if they have ears, to hear, let them hear. If they don't, walk away. However, I think there is a lot of wisdom and balance, and ultimately at the end of the day, being able to discern when it is time to walk away and when it's time to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it feels like everybody's got a handle on that. Sounds good. I appreciated the points already made about recognizing there's a danger for us. I mean, the danger there at the end of verse 6 that they could turn and attack you. There's a warning there. There's a warning there. I appreciated some of the comments that touched on that. So it's interesting to me that we go from here to ask and it will be given. The section starting 7 through verse 11, it really feels like it connects more with the end of chapter 6, verse 25 and following. God knows what we need. He's going to give us good gifts. And so ask and it will be given to you. It connects very much with that. And even in this context, he says, verse 11, if you know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? That connects really powerfully back with chapter 6, the end of chapter 6. So to me, it's interesting that this section here in the beginning of 7 is where it's at. That it's kind of plugged in between these two things. Just clearly you can see now he's building on these points. So the idea of asking, seeking, knocking, knowing that God is going to help us find what we're looking for. And we've made this point even when we were going through the end of chapter 6, that he knows God will give good gifts to those who ask. The qualifier there, give good gifts, reminds us that that doesn't mean he's going to give us everything that we think we want. It doesn't mean he's going to give us everything that we're wishing for, but he knows how to give good gifts. And when you process that through, our understanding of parents, how parents deal with their children want the ice cream. They want the fourth cookie. They want all of this stuff that's not good for them. They want to go play in the street. They want to go jump in the river. Like those things are not always good for them. And so we have to, as parents, we have to say no. We have to put our foot down. And this is God dealing with us because he is wiser than us. He knows. He can see the same way that a parent can see the danger in the road that a child might miss. God can see the danger in the world that we might miss. And so sometimes he just tells us no. He tells us no for our own good. He tells us no because we can't handle it. Yes, ma'am.
You asked me, you didn't receive because you asked me.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Did I see another hand over here? I thought I saw somebody's hand pop up. So just understanding the reality that God knows how to give good gifts. He knows how to give us what we need, not necessarily what we want. But then just remembering this principle, we quoted this verse last Sunday in the sermon. We're talking about seeking the Lord. God wants us to seek him. He rewards those who diligently seek him. And this promise that if you seek, you will find is such an amazing promise. It's such a great anchor point for us to see. And it helps me personally to think, if I keep that good and honest heart, if I keep that good and honest heart where I'm looking for my Father's will, He will help me to find it. But it's also comforting to think about it from, you're looking out at all the lost people in the world, all the people out in the world that don't know God, they don't know the Bible, they don't understand. And this is a promise for me to think about. If they will seek, if they will just humble themselves and try to seek the Lord, He will be found by them. He will allow Himself to be found. And so that's comforting to me to know that. That's the kind of God that I serve, that we serve. He is going to, if somebody has a good and honest heart, He will allow them. He will make sure that they find Him. And that's just an important thing to remember. Absolutely. Well, we ran out of time somehow. Any other thoughts or comments down through verse 11? We'll try to pick up at verse 12 next week. All right. Appreciate the conversation. We'll have about 10 minutes before our worship hour.